Hello, I'm Don Shaw, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode 17 of Friending the Mirror. I am an author and professional speaker, and I'm happy to bring this show to you twice a month, talking about appearance-related issues. Today's episode is titled Smiling Inside, Moebius Syndrome and Me, and my guest is Roland Bienvenu. Roland was diagnosed with Moebius syndrome at age 5. I'll let Roland tell you what Moebius syndrome is, but basically, the result is paralysis of the facial muscles. Roland's condition resulted in him being teased and bullied growing up. Even as an adult, he has faced social issues and had trouble finding a job. After achieving a master's degree in public administration, he was hired by the City of Houston's Personnel Department, where he worked for 28 years before retiring in 2013. He currently serves on the Moebius Syndrome Foundation Board of Directors, a post he's held for a decade. Additionally, he is starting his second term on the Houston Commission on Disabilities. Very happy in Craniofacial Awareness Month. I'm really happy to be able to welcome Roland Bienvenu to Friendly Mirror. Roland, could you tell us about Moebius syndrome and also tell us about yourself?
Sure, Don. Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here to join you for your 17th webcast. Well, Moebius syndrome is a rare neurological uh, disorder. It's congenital, which basically means you have it from birth forward. Um, it simply means that you are lacking the sixth and seventh cranial nerves, which control your ability to show facial expression, smile, wink, frown, blink your eyes. It also does not allow you the ability to move your eyes from side to side. Uh, and I said that this this means you lack the sixth and seventh nerves. I think that's true of most of us with Moebius. It's true in my case. In other cases, it may simply be that you have the sixth and seventh cranial nerves, but they're just not functional. But the net result is the same. You have the facial paralysis. You can't do any of the things I just mentioned. Occasionally, we'll see other conditions that are not necessarily connected with Moebius. We still don't know any of this for certain, but you'll find people with Moebius who may have other conditions, such as, well, we've had people with autism, we've had people with respiratory issues, uh, we've had people with digestive issues, club feet, certain physical anomalies, missing limbs, that type of thing. Um, the spectrum of Moebius is kind of wide. I was just telling Dawn that my example is sort of in the middle of the range. Some people don't really have that much in the way of facial paralysis and they look pretty normal. Others are more distorted than I am, for lack of a better term. And I was diagnosed at age 5. I'll talk a bit more about that later. But back in 1956, when I was 5, certainly it was a more rare congenital condition than it is today. There's probably, I would guess, 2,000 cases known worldwide, although we are quite certain that there's a lot more than that. We just don't know everyone who's been diagnosed, or we haven't identified everyone, but I suspect there's a lot more out there. There's supposed to be one in every 500,000 births worldwide. Um, so that tells you basically what Moebius is. Myself, I'm pretty healthy from my neck on down. I'm normal, I'm athletic, I'm in good condition and good health. Other people with Moebius aren't necessarily so lucky. Uh, I became, well, as I said, I was diagnosed when I was a child, but there were a couple of ladies in California who started the Moebius Syndrome Network back in the 80s. They lived in LA, and that organization eventually became the Moebius Syndrome Foundation. I believe we were incorporated in 1992. Sometime in the early 90s, I became aware of that organization a few years later. I attended my first Moebius conference. We do a conference every 2 years, even numbered years. So I attended my first one in 98. I've been to each one ever since. I've met a lot of wonderful people. I've networked with young and old, parents especially, and made a lot of new friends and
Hey,
lifelong friends. And
can I in here for a second? Actually, we were talking about going to the conventions and whatnot, and I was wondering, before you attended the convention, did you know very many people that had Mobius or even
uh,
facial diseases?
good question. I just knew a few because I was in touch with the heads of the foundation at that time, and I said, "Hey, I live here in Houston, Texas. I do have Mobius. I'm an adult," and they put me in touch with people here who have it. And basically, my first contact was a lady who had a 3-year-old daughter. So I met them one day, and then gradually I met a few others in Texas who had it, including one other adult. So yeah, before I attended my first conference, I was in touch and had met some others with the condition, but it's very emotional to go to one of our conferences and see not just a few, but probably 50, 60 others with Mobius, anywhere from uh, infancy on up through my age. So quite an
Yeah,
experience.
I was going to ask you how that felt, but you
It
kind
was
of
emotional.
answered.
I mean, you get to see the first thing I thought of, I was around these other adults and I was looking at them and I was thinking, well, this is interesting, because I'm finally seeing myself through, if this makes sense, through other people's eyes. In other words, I look at these people and I think, well, now I can see all these thousands of people I've known through the years. They would probably see these people the same way I am because we have certain uh, little nuances and ways that we conduct ourselves. And, we have a small mouth, so when we eat, we have to push the food like this, and it's awkward when you're dining with someone who's normal, quote unquote, and they might stare at you thinking, what is he doing, and this type of thing. But you notice that with other people, and I've been doing that. They do that, and just things like that. But it was very inspiring. Some have had far greater challenges than I have. But
I hope
so
I
that
didn't
go
lose your
ahead.
train of thought. I hope I didn't make you lose your train of thought because, yeah, keep going.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I hooked into the foundation and the people behind it in the 90s and got involved with the conferences. And as I was saying, I attended each one since every 2 years, and we move them around. The last one was in, well, just outside of Washington, D.C., in fact, where I was born, Bethesda, Maryland. And that's where the National Institute of Health is. And the one next year will be in Long Beach, California, just south of LA. Um, so anyway, my dad was a career military man, and he was in the Navy, had been serving for 10 years before my birth. And as you do in the military, you move around a lot. So every couple of years we were moving somewhere. And I moved about 5 times before he retired in 1965. And we lived in, for instance, Rhode Island, Washington, D.C., San Diego, Ottawa, Canada was the last tour of duty. And, it was a nice experience. I can't say if it made my having Mobius any easier or any harder, but um, and I think it's impossible to say that. I have no idea if it would have been much different if I
Well,
had lived in just one
uh,
place.
if I could jump in, how was it? I mean, when you moved from place to place, I mean, when you were somewhere for a while, did people adapt to you and then it became easier and then you moved and had to start all over? Or was it like, oh, thank goodness I'm moving so I don't have to deal with these people anymore?
Well,
A little of both.
it's a blessing. Sometimes you have to reacclimate yourself to new schools and surroundings, but you would no matter if you have Moebius or not. So I don't think I had any particular issue in adapting. It was just something I learned to do. You know, it made me more flexible and adaptable, but I think it does that for anyone. You know, I have two older sisters and one younger one, and at least the two older ones would probably agree with me there. So yeah, I guess it was challenging at times, but um, you know, and I had at different schools. I had some teasing and bullying here and there, and that's to be expected. Others with Mobius can tell you some horror stories, but actually, my worst bullying was really in high school, and not so much before that. Um, But my dad decided to retire from the Navy when I was 14, and we moved down to Louisiana. That's where my parents are from originally. And so we moved down there, started high school, went to high school and college in the same town. We had one of the state universities there, so I finished with a degree in business and worked different jobs around there for several years. You mentioned in your intro that I at times had difficulties in finding employment, and that was true. And I think it was either largely due to the Mobius or perhaps other factors. It's sort of hard to really point your finger and say, well, I didn't get the job for this reason or that reason, because I think that line is blurry. Certainly, there were times when I may not have been the most qualified or there wasn't the best fit between Roland and this job. So, you know, I really can't blame Mobius on all of that, but it certainly plays a big role in your seeking employment. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. I did start to work for an oil field supply company, which is based here in Houston. And after a year, they relocated me to North Houston, which is where our corporate office was. So I had a promotion and pay increase and a move all rolled up into one. So that's how I first came to Texas. And then a year later, the oil business was not doing well at all. That company wasn't doing well. The price of oil had gone way down, just like it has in recent months. And there were a lot of layoffs, like there are now. And 25% of my company was laid off, including me. So I just couldn't find any other suitable employment, so I ended up going to graduate school, earned, as you said, an MPA, which is a master's in public administration degree. And then around that same time, I got married. I had met a lady, and not long after that, I started to work with the city of Houston. They made me an offer. And,
You need to stop there for a second, Roland. You're kind of glossing over something really important there,
okay.
and that is the whole getting married issue. So,
Oh, I'd rather forget about that. No, I just.
well, I realize that you're no longer together, so I certainly understand. But how was it for you to get into a relationship, to be in a relationship? I mean, do you mind sharing what that was like?
Well, not at all. It's always been a real challenge for me to find and establish a relationship, and to be perfectly candid with you. And I'm going back to my younger years when I was dating in my teens and 20s. I was married when I was about 32, and yeah, it presented a lot of issues because yeah, women just weren't necessarily attracted to me. I wasn't having much luck. I'd date here and there, but it wasn't anything that was meant to last. You know, maybe a woman was being nice by accepting the offer of a date, but I had a lot of rejection. And there's other things that go along with that, not just dating, but socialization issues. Even guys may not want to be your friend because of the way you look and this and that. So anyway, to answer your question, yeah, that's been a real issue and remains so today. We divorced in 2001, and I've tried to establish new relationships. I've done online dating with mixed success, and I did have a couple of relationships in the last several years. They did not last. But I'm kind of like that little Energizer bunny. I keep going and going and going and going. And, I think if nothing else, I'm resilient. It's not easy to, to do this, to navigate those waters, but I just try not to get too discouraged, and I still keep at it. In fact, I had an online date the other day. Well, when I say online date, I mean a lady I met online. I met her for coffee, and then we seem to hit it off. So we're going to dinner Friday night.
Oh,
So
congratulations.
wish me luck, you guys. So anyway, yeah, that's a struggle, and I think a lot of us would agree with Moebius, agree that it's a struggle for them too. And some of my friends with Moebius are happily married, and so we're not all single. But does that address your question?
Yeah, it does. And actually, I kind of wanted to jump backwards because when you were talking about being in school, you kind of glossed over the whole bullying issue. And I
Bullying.
don't, yeah, the bullying, yeah, I don't need to hear the details of like what happened unless you want to share them. But how was it? How did you deal with it? What was your method for dealing with other people being mean to you effectively?
I think, as I said, the worst of it was when I was in high school, and I had some when I was younger. And basically, the way I dealt with it probably wasn't the best way to deal with it. You could say I turned the other cheek. Um, and, some friends, some people would see someone bullying me, and they might interject themselves and say, "Well, you stop that." They tell them just to lay off me. But, usually I was on my own, and some of it was even a little physical. One guy even knocked me down in class as I was leaving carrying books, things like that. So yeah, it was hard. You know, uh,
But
I don't know what else to say. Sometimes they call me names. Um,
it sounds like you had a pretty decent support system, though. It sounds like you had friends who were willing to step up for you. And
here and there, not always, but in fact, my oldest sister, who's 5 years older, she recognized that there was some of that going on when we were kids. Well, I might have been, I don't know, 5 or 6 at the time, and she was older, but she would stand up for me. And she told me much later that that's part of the reason she went into medicine. She became well, she earned a PhD in nursing sciences. But that touched me when she told me that. So yeah, and you'll find that with Mobius, we have support systems within our family, and our siblings, especially the older ones, often stand up for us. You don't necessarily want your mom or dad coming out and saying, "Oh, don't pick on Susie," but I guess they've done that. But yeah, family support systems are very important.
yeah, and I also feel that when it comes to bullying, just having people speak out for you, even if they're not necessarily someone that would, consider you a friend, I do believe that speaking up and supporting other kids, and because I would imagine that it makes you just feel like people care. And I think that's one of the biggest issues with bullying is when kids get to a point where they just don't feel like anybody cares.
And what was tricky for me, I guess I considered telling a teacher, telling someone at school, "Hey, Ronnie just pushed me down." Well, I could have done that very easily, but I don't know that that would have really solved anything. They might have given Ronnie some punishment, but he's probably going to be back at me next week. You know, I don't think that would cause him to lay off of me. So it was tough. I just didn't know of any good way to handle it. So, I'm not a real big guy. I'm 5'7", weigh almost 150, so I couldn't inflict much physical damage if I wanted to. And even if I tried, I probably would have gotten into some trouble for fighting. So damned if you do, damned if you don't. Sometimes when people are bullied, they just give the person a slug to the chest or head or whatever, but I never did that.
I'm
So
not convinced. Some people do swear by that. I'm not convinced it's the answer, but
some
that's
parents would encourage their kids to do that, and I can't say I'd argue against it, but the negative consequences that that kid could be disciplined or perhaps thrown out of school. So, well, we could argue about that for hours, but
so back to
yeah.
the job. You were talking about getting a job and how sometimes you just couldn't be sure if it was just not being qualified. I mean, how was your attitude? I mean, do you feel like you interviewed well? Because I do hear a lot about that a lot of times it's how you present yourself, regardless, of how you look.
Interviews, well, in general, I thought I interviewed well. There's always room for improvement, and after some interviews, you walk out thinking, "Oh, doggone it, I could have done better. I really didn't answer this question or that question very well." So there's always room for improvement. Um, but it's difficult for us when we interview because sometimes you can tell that the interviewer is distracted. You can almost read their mind. They're thinking, well, this guy, there's something wrong with his face. What's going on here? They just can't quite figure it out. And we've just some of us with Moebius have discussed this, and most of my colleagues and I believe that the best way to handle that is just to put it out in the open. And I did that when the city of Houston interviewed me in 1985. I told you work in a little mention whenever you can during the interview. You say, "Oh, by the way, I wanted you to know that I have Moebius syndrome," and you spend just 20 seconds describing it. So that's why my face is the way it is. So at least that way they're not guessing any longer about it because it is a distraction, and a lot of them are distracted the whole time you're in the interview, and instead of focusing on what you're saying and your responses and whatever you're bringing across, they're thinking, what is with this guy? So I just put it out there, and certainly under ADA, they cannot ask you, do you have a disability? That's very illegal, but certainly you are free to self-disclose. So I always recommend that. It didn't hurt me. In fact, they offered me the job. The worst thing that could happen is they don't offer you the job. Um, so
Good disability issue, actually, since you brought that up.
the which issue?
A disability issue. Now,
Uh-huh.
phobias in and of itself is or is not considered a disability.
If you're referring to ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, I assume, it depends on what your overall condition is. And I don't have the textbook definition of an ADA disability, but if you look at ADA, it basically says a person, or I think it says a qualified person with a disability is a person who is incapable of self-care. Self-care means the ability to bathe yourself, to clothe yourself, to feed yourself. I think to transport yourself, to be mobile, to be able to communicate. It's certain descriptors such as that. Well, I can do all those things. So under the strict ADA definition, I'm not really disabled. However, um, there is one part of ADA that might bring me into it, and that is if someone regards you as having a disability, then you're protected by the ADA. Well, okay, that's fine, but how am I going to prove that if I just went through a job interview and I didn't mention anything about my Mobius, and then they decide to hire someone else, I can say, well, oh, they regarded me as being disabled, which might be a true statement, but how will I prove that? They're not, I don't think they're going to admit, we think this guy was mentally challenged or something like that, which is common with people with Moebius because of our lack of facial expression. They think that we're lacking in intelligence and we might have an intelligence issue, So,
Yeah,
but
that seems
unless
to
I'm
happen.
not going to come out and say that, but unless I can prove it, maybe get someone else to say, yeah, Joe interviewed Roland last week, and Joe told me that he thought Roland was mentally challenged, but that would be quite rare if you could find such testimony,
Yeah,
or it,
I
it
know.
certainly wouldn't be in writing.
Yeah, I know when I interviewed, um, when I was able to become state certified in the state of Washington to be disabled because I have a physical issue, and the way it was stated is that might cause someone to discriminate against me. And that's how I was able to get state certification. Now, I don't know if that stands up under ADA, and they basically told me I wouldn't qualify for federal, which is fine because personally, I don't consider myself disabled.
And I don't either, like you, but the thing is, under the ADA definition, it could only be applied to me personally if someone regarded me as having a disability. Whether I do or not, that's not important. Just regarding you as having a disability, and they fail to either take some action with respect to you, fail to hire you, or simply discriminated against you. But I've been facing that for many years, and I guess my worst experience was since I was with the city, because I think it definitely affected my ability to promote. So
Now,
that was my key issue.
could you explain that, please? How it affected?
It's kind of a long story, but what it amounts to is that when I went into the public sector, I thought, oh, okay, well, these guys here would be more welcoming, more receptive in terms of someone with a facial difference. I think they're going to be more accepting as opposed to a corporation that, they take one look at me and say, well, we don't want this guy in our corporation, because of image. Image is the key. Well, and guess what? I quickly found out that that was also the case with, at least with my level of government, and there was that occurring all the time. It was not easy to prove. In fact, to this day, I'm not sure that I could prove it, but I know it was going on. I had one higher level person who disliked me. I think that had a lot to do with it, and it wasn't just that person; it was others and management here and there. So, uh, and I always say that you have to pick your battles. So I wasn't going to file any claim, any lawsuit unless I thought I had a good, solid case. And I don't feel like I ever did. And even if I did, you have to consider what happens if you do file. So if you do file, you might be in for a real battle, a real fight. They can start treating you differently. They can make your life a little more, let us say, unpleasant on the job. And I
Yeah.
was cognizant of all that.
Now, one thing I want to be clear about, because we might have people watching this who actually who are more physically limited than you and I are,
Mhm.
and I want to say, I mean, if you're in a situation where your employer is being discriminatory and you do have rights protected by ADA, by all means, stand up for them. I understand Roland's situation.
Mhm.
I probably would have been in a similar. I mean, if I had felt that, I probably would have been similar. Proving discrimination based on looks is difficult to do, but we are not. I just want to make it very clear, Roland. I mean, I'm assuming that we are not discouraging people for standing up for what they are entitled to.
Well, certainly, but every case is different. And believe me, if I had had an instance where I thought my a particular case was stronger, then I think I would have stepped forward. But I just never really had one instance in which I thought, you know, promotional bypass was strong enough to go file a claim with the EEOC, which administers the ADA. And we also had an internal process for that as well. So, and I was in labor relations. I know how these things work. I have a special insight to that. I wasn't just any HR employee. I dealt with that type of stuff often enough to know and have the wisdom there. So, but yeah, I encourage anyone else who may have similar feelings, by all means, if you want to pursue a claim or look into a possible litigation, feel free to look into that. I can't, I couldn't advise anyone not to, but everyone's different. Cases are different.
Well, Charlene wrote, and she mentioned that it's excellent that you told potential employers during the interview that you had Moebius, and I agree with that. I think just clearing the air and just saying, hey, like in my case, yeah, I had a tumor removed when I was born. It left my face half paralyzed. This is why I look like I do. Period. End of explanation. Move on. Let's move on. But I agree, and of course, you're not required to disclose, but people are curious. Curiosity is totally normal. So clearing the air, I think, is something very important. So, Roland, I wanted to move on a little bit about, first of all, regarding Mobius itself. I'm sure that you've been asked, and I'm sure that people wonder, well, can't they do surgery to, quote, fix it? I love that word, fix.
Yeah.
But any other surgical options?
Yes, there is. Well, let me back up because I had surgery when I was 5, but not necessarily to fix the Mobius. What they did back then, my mouth opening since the time I was born was much wider than it is now, and that caused some drooling issues. It may have caused some speech issues, but I was really too young to know that. But I think the main concern was my drooling, so they took me to my parents took me to Bethesda Navy Hospital, which is still there outside of Washington, D.C., and the plastic surgeon performed surgery. He removed some tissue from my right leg and he did a surgical sling from around my ears down right below my lower lip, and it basically held my lower lip up to where it would prevent drooling. And so I think it did help quite a bit. I do have a little drooling issue even today, but nothing too severe. But to answer your question, there is what we call smile surgery, which was perfected by a doctor in Toronto, Canada, Dr. Ron Zucker, with the I think it's called the Hospital for Sick Children. Anyway, Dr. Zucker has I don't he may have performed that surgery a few times on adults, but it's mainly on children. And they you take some, I guess to make a long story short, you take some tissue and then it's similar in a way to what I had done, but a little more complicated. And you do surgery on one side of the mouth to pull in the lip, and then after I think 6 or 8 weeks, then you do surgery on the other side and connect the muscle to the other side, and that way, whenever the person wants to smile, they don't do it naturally or normally, but they have to think about it, and then you normally you look at them and say, can you smile? And then they'll just pull this and it forms a smile. And I understand that it helps them with their speech and eating to some extent. So that's been done for I couldn't tell you how many people have had it, probably in the hundreds now worldwide. So there is that option, but we being the foundation and me personally, we don't tell anyone with Moebius, hey, you need to get the surgery because that's a very individualistic type of decision, a very personal decision. I would never tell someone you should or should not get this. If you're interested in it, yes, check it out, understand what you're going to go through, understand the benefits, and then just decide for yourself if you want it.
Do you provide information on the Moebius Foundation website? Uh,
I,
is there, I mean, without judgment, do you provide information?
uh, I haven't looked at that part of our website in a while, but I believe there is something there regarding the smile surgery. And I don't know how detailed it is, but I'm sure that it's a neutral type of article. We're not saying, oh, you should have it, or your 10-year-old child with Mobius should have it. But
Option.
yeah,
It's
it's
all
an
about,
option. And you mentioned the word fix. Well, you know, that's how some of us view it. Well, why do I need to be fixed? I considered that when I was in my late 40s, and I thought, well, I'm not really unhappy with the way I am. Why should I surgically change myself at this point in my life? Because I'm about halfway through my life. I may live another 45 years, and right now I'm 64, still going strong. So I didn't feel any compelling need to have smile surgery. And if you'd asked me that question when I was 10 years old, I think the answer would have been the same. No, I don't want to change myself. Another 10-year-old, he or she may say, sure, I'd like to do that. So,
yeah, I probably would have. I mean, I didn't really, I'm very comfortable with myself now, but it took a while to get there. So, and I agree. I mean, I think people, I would hope that we could be happy with the way we are, but society being what it is, that's, they get a lot of outside pressure and it's unfortunate. And hey, while I'm thinking of it, I wanted to ask you, and if it gets too personal, we can stop or change the subject, but regarding the online dating, I know it came up in a facial difference group that I belong to about whether or not to post a photo on an online dating site. And I was wondering, how did you make the acquaintance of this woman that you're now having, you know, that you're dating? And I was just wondering, from the point of view of someone who does have a difference, how did that work for you? Because it did work. So I
it's
want to know.
it's not my first foray into online dating either, because I started doing that in 2006, and as I said earlier, I had two relationships through online dating, so it's worked before. Uh, well, I first tried it in 2006. I decided to post photos because I think everyone should. You're more likely to get responses if you have photos, no matter if you're like me or you or you're normal, quote unquote. So I think that's something we should all do. Of course, you could also say, well, Roland, if you post your photos, then they're not as likely to respond if they don't think you're attractive enough. Yeah, that might be true, but here I am. Take it or leave it. This is me. This is what I look like. I try to put at least 4 or 5 photos. Uh, I also have a little uh, well, it's about 2 or 3 sentences, a little section talking about Moebius syndrome. This is what I have, and that's my way of saying, well, this is part of me. If you can accept this, that's great. If you can't, well, just go on to the next guy and check out his profile. So it's been a mixed bag with my online dating.
Yeah, but really, and I mean, it's such a cliche, but the whole reason for the title of this episode is just because you're not physically smiling because your lips don't move doesn't mean that you're not a happy, joyful, upbeat person. And
Yeah,
from my,
well, I'm glad you mentioned that because recently on one of these sites, a lady sent me a text message. I think I had approached her first, and she says, "Well, you look unhappy. Your pictures make you look unhappy. Are you not a happy person?" And I said, "Well, yes, I'm basically a happy guy, but if you read my profile, I mentioned I have Moebius syndrome, blah blah blah," and then she didn't respond after that. So they notice it, or at least they should. And sometimes you go to the initial date. We call that the meet and greet, sometimes you can tell they're a little uncomfortable and they may want to end the date quickly, oh, I have to leave, and this type of thing. So I have had that happen, but I met some nice women. Just
Hey, there's a lot of normal, quote unquote, normal looking people who've had that happen too, I'm sure. So,
oh yeah, oh yeah. Well, and everyone's playing a game, and we're looking for the same thing. You have some game players out there though who are just either jerking someone around, or you have scammers too that you have to watch out for. And I tend to have done better with online dating than uh, meeting women any other way. I do belong to singles groups, and those are good. I enjoy these social events. I just haven't connected with anyone through those. Although I have had some dates through groups like that.
well, I mean, I'm married and have been for 20 years, and I hope to stay that way. So for me, it was more just to help other people. And if I ever did find myself in that situation in the future, what path to take? Because my philosophy has always been I'm going to do better if I meet somebody in person because, or online in a chat situation like Facebook, because they're going to get a better idea of who I am. And because the longer you know someone, regardless of how you know them, as long as you see them, the less important looks are over time.
I
That's,
agree. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And there's so much more to a person than just their physical facial appearance. There's many dimensions. Someone may be sort of how can I put it? Moderately attractive or average looking, but they could have a personality that shines as clear as day, and other attributes that I really appreciate and like. So everyone has their strengths and weaknesses,
Or
and
it could be
I tend to smile. I can't smile physically, but I smile with my dry sense of humor, and I use uh, hand gestures. Maybe it's part of my French heritage. I don't know, but people who know me can tell when I'm happy, which is most of the time, actually.
I was just going to say, I mean, you were talking about emotion. I mean, you can have people who are gorgeous, handsome or beautiful on the outside, and they can be incredibly dull, incredibly boring, or for that matter, incredibly unhappy. So looks,
That's true too. Yeah, a beautiful woman could like me, but if she lacks some of these other characteristics that I'm looking for, then it's not going to be a connection.
so let's move on and talk about the Moebius Syndrome Foundation. You've already talked a little bit about how you got involved, but can you talk about what they do for people who have Moebius?
Okay, well, we're a 501c3 organization. As I said, we were incorporated around 1992, I think. Our president lives in Missouri, north of St. Louis, and we have, I believe, it's 10 board members who live all around the country. I've been on the board since 2005. Um, this is the U.S. foundation. We have other foundations in the world, but we're talking just the U.S. Moebius Syndrome Foundation. Moebius is worldwide. We do have people with Moebius in South America and Asia, Africa. I met a young lady from Russia once, throughout Europe. But we we are well funded now. We we started out, like I said, with those two Mobius moms in LA back in the 80s. I think they started to gather names and addresses, and we're on a shoestring budget, and now we have had nice donations, and we're well funded. We hired an executive director not long ago. What we do, I mentioned that we have these conferences every other year, every even year. And that's a good way for people with Mobius and their families to come together, meet each other, network. We have seminars set up and sessions where, you know, some of them are quite private because we get together and talk about some of the sensitive issues that we've been discussing today. You know, everything from bullying to dating, things of that nature. Um, we hear from Dr. Zucker, who does the smile surgery. There's various other speakers we have that are of interest to us who have Moebius, whether you're my age or you're a parent of a child. We fund, to some extent, we fund research. There is a lot of research going on, genetics research. We've been behind that for a long while. The National Institute of Health is currently doing a study funded by a federal grant, and I was part of that. I went back in May, stayed there a week, and they tested me and ran all sorts of different examinations. And we wanted to do that with 72 people with Moebius. I think I was number 35. So the study isn't over yet. Um, we are in the process of transitioning. We're talking about doing regional conferences or regional get-togethers, uh, in addition to the national conference. Um, we provide support, meaning, well, we'll put you in touch with other people at Mobius. You live in the Seattle, Washington area, right? You're
Yeah, I
in,
mean,
so if you have Mobius and you contacted our president and said, well, I'm an adult with Mobius, I live in Seattle, Washington, the first thing she would do is she'd send you an informational packet containing, among other things, a DVD which explains Mobius. That's also on our website. She would also send you an email saying, Don, welcome, and I'm copying some other adults with Mobius who might like to communicate with you. And they may or may not live near you. Sometimes they will, but right away you'll be connected. You know, Roland may send you a email saying, "Hey, Don, how you doing? I'm so and so." So we do that quite a bit. We try
that's
to connect,
kind of,
and it's awesome. And sometimes I talk to some of these people about issues they're having, you know, whether it's dating, job, whatever. So we do that. I think that pretty much summarizes what the foundation does.
yeah. So, Charlene actually has a couple of questions. Well, one of them we're going to get to because I always ask all my guests this anyway.
Okay.
She did also bring up that apparently there's only 2,000 identified individuals with Mobius. So
And worldwide,
worldwide, yeah.
that's an approximate number. Uh-huh.
She's wondering how, if there with such a small number, where do you find your funding?
A lot of our funding is received from families of people with Mobius or relatives. Um, we did get a small grant from the Christopher Reeves Foundation, but that was to produce that video that I mentioned. It was made at least 10 years ago. We have um, one or two wealthy donors who have ties with, I think it's a young man with Mobius, and they've been very, very generous. So, we've come a long way. So to answer your question, a lot of small donations and some very big, generous ones.
Yeah, sometimes all it takes is one person, one family with money who decide they're going to help solve this or put
Right.
money.
Well, we get a lot of $100 donations, but when someone gives a much larger sum, well, certainly we won't turn that down either. Because we try to put it to good use, and I think we're good stewards of the funds that we receive.
Now, another question that Charlene asked is regarding, are you guys connected with the Children's Craniofacial Association? Do you know?
Not to my knowledge, we may be a member of them. We're a member of the National Organization of Rare Diseases, or NORD for short. But that particular organization, I'm not, very familiar with them. So, to the best of my knowledge, no.
Yeah, because I know that, I mean, collaboration between organizations that really have similar purposes. I mean, craniofacial kids is one kind of craniofacial adults, but man, connecting the two, because I know that mentorship can be just so incredibly powerful for
We,
these young
we,
people.
we are trying to do more networking among well, we call them our scientific advisory panel. It's mostly medical professionals, and we want these medical professionals to interact with each other to share information, and that could be very beneficial in unlocking some of the mysteries behind Moebius. What causes it, which I didn't really talk about earlier, and they're still being researched, but it could be genetic. Perhaps someone in your family line had it. Maybe your parent had it. In my case, and in many, many cases, no one else in the family has had it. I think I personally think that there are environmental causes, which are many, and these are just theories now. So, but I think if I had to guess, I'd say that most of the people with Moebius have it due to environmental reasons.
Well, that's interesting. So to expand on what Charlene was asking, because we're getting towards the end of the show,
Oh,
and
wow, time flies.
time flies when you're having fun, right? And you
Yep.
haven't even had to start telling jokes yet, so we
No,
must.
I haven't.
But so basically, what Charlene was asking, and what I always ask is, and she asked specifically when it came to kids, to young people growing up, because obviously you've been well adjusted from a young age. But what she wants to know is, what advice would you give to parents of children with Moebius to ease their adjustment to the difference, to their facial difference, and to facilitate social inclusion? I mean, how would you, how did you do it? I mean, I guess you mentioned that you kind of weren't, you still had some social issues, but overall you handled things well and you were happy with yourself.
Well, by and large, I don't know that there's any one answer to that. What I would say is, just do the best you can for your child. Love them, care for them. My parents did that for me. Um, support them. Coming to these Mobius conferences means so much because you interact with others and you get a lot of wisdom from the other people who are there. One, in terms of some of the school issues, I've heard some of the parents say, and I don't necessarily advocate this, but some of them have said, what they'll do is the first day of school, when maybe little Susie with Mobius is starting out, um, it's usually the parent. The parent will appear before the class and say, "Okay, well, my daughter here, Susie, she's got Mobius syndrome. She explains what that is in the terms that the kids can understand, just because it's hard for a younger kid to understand about the facial nerve paralysis. But to the best of your ability, you talk about that and say, well, otherwise, little Susie is just the same as all of you. She just has a different outward appearance, and she may not be able to talk as well as you can. She may not be able to move around as quickly because she has club feet, but otherwise she's the same. And I've heard parents say that once they do that, then that pretty much means a lot. But it also calls some attention to the kid. So I'm not positive that that's a good measure to take, but nonetheless, that's something to think about.
Well, I think people do tend to be a little more afraid of things they don't understand, and that's where the bad behavior often comes from, is that lack of understanding. So my
Yeah.
tendency would be to agree with that approach. I mean, as long as you're not making the poor kid a spectacle, but on the other hand, they kind of are anyway. I mean, anybody who's different is going to attract attention. So, like the same thing with your job interview, it's the same philosophy. Nip it in the bud. Make people aware, and then because I know that when I have kids stare at me, I will often invite them to ask me, and then I explain it, and all of a sudden I'm not interested anymore. they quit staring at me, they go back to and start doing something else. But it's the mystery is why they stare.
And yeah, and you raise a good point. What I've done with some people is, well, with whether it's coworkers or people I casually know, I'll try to mention something about the Mobius, but I'll bring it up in a casual way. I won't meet you right now, and then 2 minutes later say, "Oh, by the way, Don, I have Mobius syndrome," and blah blah blah. No, usually once I've known someone for a little while, I'll try to work that into the conversation. Oh, last night I had a conference call with the Moebius Syndrome Foundation. I'm a member of that board, and that's for people like me who have the sixth and seventh cranial nerve and facial paralysis. And so I've had people who've known me well for a long time who finally ask, what I wanted to ask, what about your face? So I wish they'd asked me that a long time ago.
Well,
So,
with us, I mean, we're not looking at ourselves all the time. I mean, except when I'm doing a webinar, then I am.
because we're so used to ourselves, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So often, you're right. It's not something that's like, "Hello, my name is Don. You know, I had a tumor when I was born." I mean, I suppose I could buy a T-shirt, but I don't.
Well,
It's
we have them for Mobius syndrome, yeah. Something to think about.
so anyway. It's getting close to wrap up time, but I did want you to spend a minute or so just talking a little bit about what you do on the Houston Commission on Disabilities, because I know you work there.
Right.
You do there.
The city of Houston is a large city, I think 2.2 million population now, and our mayor over there has a lot of boards and commissions. So one of those is the Commission on Disabilities, and we're a 12-member commission. Um, I serve in one of the positions. Most of the members by ordinance have to have a disability, so I qualify for that, even though I'm not necessarily an ADA disabled person. We're mostly an advisory commission. We don't make policy. We cannot do that, but we do listen to people's concerns in the community regarding disabled issues, mobility issues, you name it. And we meet monthly, and we make recommendations to the mayor or city council or sometimes our departments. In terms of disabled people. We just had a program to celebrate the 25th anniversary of ADA, and we gave out some awards. It's Disability Awareness Month in October, so this was a kickoff for that, held last Friday. So that's basically what I do. I'm into my second term now, and I've been enjoying that.
Charlene is wondering also if you have read or are familiar with the book Wonder.
No, I heard good things about it. I should read it.
Yeah, I actually had the pleasure of speaking to it at a school once. And that was, I mean, I've read it obviously because in order to speak effectively to it, it's like, yeah, I better read it again. I'd actually read it before.
I think we looked into having that author, Palacios, come to one of our conferences and to be a keynote speaker, but for whatever reason that didn't work out.
So to wrap up with you, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for coming on with me. I really, we didn't coordinate this with Craniofacial Awareness Month on purpose. It just fortuitously worked out that way.
We
But
did.
And I mean, having a facial difference myself, I mean, my situation is so rare, but I tell you, we are a community. And it's not just facial differences, it's anyone with physical differences, because we all share such similar experiences, whether we want to or not. We have that commonality. It's like I say, everybody's different, but some of us are different on the outside. So one last thing I wanted to ask you, if you had one action item, one piece of advice for people who might not be as secure about their appearance as you are, what would you say? What could you advise them to help them start feeling better about themselves and living a happier life?
I don't have any true words of wisdom. to address that one, I would say just try to maintain as positive an attitude as you can, and try to, just look ahead and not behind you, because I've had some real struggles in my life, especially, and I mentioned two of them, just the job related struggles and also the struggle establishing a good solid romantic relationship, and just a lot of defeats, you might say. So instead of focusing on what happened in the past and, oh God, this one didn't work out, I'm so angry and upset, and I didn't get this promotion and they really screwed me around. Instead of going there, just look ahead to the future, not dwell on the past. You learn from your mistakes, your things in the past that have occurred, but don't dwell on that too much at all. Just look ahead and try to think and convince yourself that tomorrow will be a better day, and there's better things to come than what you've experienced in the past. I've been through, I didn't talk about my marriage too much, but that was definitely a failure, and I wouldn't want to experience that again. But that was just one separate phase of my life. So,
Yeah, and I'm kind of suspecting the fact that your marriage wasn't successful. I mean, there's a lot of people who have unsuccessful marriages, and it
yeah.
probably wasn't directly related to your Moebius. So it's
No,
not necessarily.
there were a lot of things going on there, but it just wasn't meant to be. And I was the one who wanted to file for divorce, so I was pretty happy that when I finally got that over with.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you again, Roland, so much for being on with me. I want to say that the URL for the website has been posted here on the side of the screen, and it is Moebius. That's Moebius syndrome.org is the website. So by all means, visit, look into the information they provide there. If you have any more questions for me or for Roland, you can contact me through this webinar, and I'll make sure that those questions get answered.
Uh-huh. And Dawn, I can also be contacted through our website, the moebiussyndrome.org. If you look under board of directors, they have the board members listed with each of our email addresses.
Absolutely. And I just think these resources are just so tremendous. Anyway, so in the same way that September is Craniofacial Awareness Month, I found out that October is Dwarfism Awareness Month. And as it happens, my next webinar, my next Friend in the Mirror webinar, I have Leah Smith, who's the Director of Public Relations for Little People of America. And that will be on Tuesday, October 13th at noon Pacific time or 3 p.m. Eastern. So that I hope you will join Leah and I, because I think that's going to be a lot of fun. One thing I want you to remember, aside from the fact that I'm an author and I do this webinar, and I hope that you'll continue to tune in because I always have such wonderful and fascinating guests like Roland.
Thank you.
And just remember not only to be kind to others, but do not forget to also be kind to yourself.
We are love. We are one. We are how we treat each other when the day is done. We are peace. We are war. We are how we treat each other, nothing more. We are how we treat each